Hello. I had my hip replaced a week ago, and while it is not the story I want to share with you today, I have, I think, a more interesting one for you today. When I was a kid, my mom sat me down every day because she noticed that my life festered with frustration for the first several weeks after my birthday. She would explain to me all the great new things that 6-year-old Charlie got to do that the former 5-year-old version couldn't. And it was like an update, really. And instantly life would ease. But while she was reframing a growing pain as an opportunity, what she was actually doing was teaching me that every day starts with space to get better. And so every day I started with space to get better at my handwriting, at homework, at making friends, baking cookies. And at 10, I found dance, which was my perfect playground for practice. Before long, though, a teacher pulled me aside and said that if I were serious about dance, I needed to lose weight. Okay, this news hit me like a belly flop. I was a kid. I wasn't prepared to defend against body shaming, and honestly, I wasn't horribly fat. But teachers assured me that a growth spurt would fix everything. All I needed to do was wait. And in that interminable period of waiting, I thought it best to practice. And that practice paid off because by 12, the dance competition circuits began rewarding me with scholarships to summer programs and copious trophies, the kind of that little plastic figurine that balances on the column. The night the judge awarded me best male dancer, outstanding dancer of the competition, he came up to congratulate me. And he said, "Charlie, you'll be unstoppable just as soon as you lose all that baby fat." Thank you. This conversation, though, became incredibly familiar. This quiet compliment about my skill couched in some loud criticism about my appearance. Over the next 3 years, my mom realized that while nothing in my body was changing, my self-esteem was. And so she asked, of course, if I wanted to make space to get better, and I said yes. So I went on a diet. I counted calories, I measured food, I distilled the pleasure of eating into a cold and calculated science. But I lost 14 pounds. And while between us, that 14 pounds most likely stunted my growth, it worked. Because by 18, the National Foundation for Advancement in the Arts awarded me second place out of more than 10,000 high school seniors in a competition called the Presidential Honors. I was so proud and I felt at the top of my game. I confidently auditioned for 14 ballet companies that year, and all 14 of them said no. But it wasn't just a no. One letter read, "We regret to inform you that we have absolutely no use for a body like yours in our company." I was crestfallen. Eventually, through a friend of a friend, I did land a job, but it was sight unseen. And I noticed after the first year that I was always cast as a clown or a court jester. And when I asked why this was, they said it was because you do these parts so well. But I later learned a deeper truth. And so I ask you, did you know that there's a height and a hair requirement to be a prince? I don't meet those requirements. Well, wondering if the grass could be greener, the following season I auditioned for 41 companies, casting a wide net, and this time all 41 said no. My favorite was the director who whispered softly under his breath, but still loud enough for me to hear, "I just didn't think he'd actually be that short." I was like, surprise! The weird thing, though, is that while more than 36 companies were flatly rejecting my appearance, my skill was being considered for a Princess Award. This is an international acknowledgement that celebrates achievement in the arts. So I had near best in the nation skill, but it was trapped in a body that nobody could stomach. At 21, I thought maybe now the spell would be broken when I was cast as the lead in George Balanchine's Theme and Variations. Like a black belt in karate, I'd earned my white tights. Except, before I could perform the part, we needed to get approval from the Balanchine Foundation because apparently I was dangerously too short to play the role. It was just so frustrating. I convinced myself at that point that if I became perfect, maybe they would stop talking about my body. And so I got to work. I made as much space as possible to get better. I sacrificed friends and food, family, everything. I tried my best not to listen to the critics, teachers, and professionals who reminded me daily, in print and to my face, that I was too short, fat, thick, squat, robust, and way too chunky. It was really hard to ignore, though, when I was compared to a fire plug on 3 separate occasions. Like, what are the chances? If everybody's thinking it, right? One critic wrote, "A plump, smooth-skinned virtuoso, too compact and bald to be a prince," so apparently there was a requirement, "though he can do all the steps and more." I was the best, worst body on stage. The penultimate blow for me came when an international dance magazine selected me for a feature article, and the title of the article was "Unorthodox Bodies," and it more or less highlighted a dancer who shouldn't, but still does. I felt like I belonged on a Coney Island sideshow more than I did on a stage. And it turns out all of my effort to improve my skill only drew more attention to my appearance. So it wasn't that I'd failed, but it was that the failure was me. So imagine for a moment that you find your calling, this magical place where nature and nurture align. When I was dancing, I was oblivious to my past, to who I'd been or who I was supposed to be. I was unconcerned with my future and what was expected. I didn't care. When I was dancing, I was perfectly present and precisely me. And when I was dancing, I was beautiful. But now imagine that this place where life just makes sense becomes radioactive, and the longer you stay, the sicker you become. What do? Do you quit, or do you get sick? I mean, both of them were a horrible punishment, and I felt like to make this decision, I needed objectivity. So I went to my journal and I mapped all of the critical points in my career using elevation to determine their value. And then I color-coded them by catalyst, deciding what made the event happen. If it was because of me, wrong button, me, because of others, or because of chance. And what surprised me is that as attacked as I felt, people were only there to make my life better. And that every time chance tore me down, I was the one who stood back up. And in all of the best parts of my career, they happened because I said yes. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was the driver in my life. And in this moment of clarity, I, on a Hail Mary pass, auditioned for Twyla Tharp, and she hired me on the spot. To this day, it's one of 2 times in my career that I was hired for me, not through friends of friends and not through chance, and sight fully seen. Dancing with her was paradise, an artistic incubation, and within months, the European Critics' Choice Awards voted me Best Male Dancer of the Year. I was thrilled, and I wondered if now that spell had been broken, I'd finally been untethered from the nightmare of my body. And a few months later, I got my answer. I was being considered for the leading role in her Broadway show about the Vietnam War, and while I had her full support, I learned that some of the producers, colleagues, and even best friends were convinced that my short, fat, bald body couldn't portray the masculine heartthrob that the role needed. My body was insufferable. Flat honest, I felt like I was living in a horror movie, and my body was the bad guy, and no matter what I did, it just kept coming back. Well, as a kid, I played this game, and it was usually when I was seated in the mezzanine looking out at the audience below. So for a brief moment, everybody please close your eyes and imagine a snowstorm so thick that your vision becomes this depthless field of white. And when all you can see is that white, I'd like you to notice what stands out in this photo when you now open your eyes. Okay, one more time, close your eyes, but this time, once your eyes are shut, paint that white wall with crimson red. And when all you can see is red, TEDx red, notice what stands out now when you open your eyes. This was a silly little game I played with myself, but what it showed me was that we see in life kind of what we're looking for. And so if I wanted to be a heartthrob, I just needed to change how they saw me. Now, as I saw it, I could do nothing, and if I succeeded, I'd be lucky, until luck ran out, and then I'd be a victim of circumstance. If I did something and succeeded, why, I'd be a heartthrob. My body would no longer matter. But if I failed, I alone would be to blame. And unlike losing from inaction, shucks, losing from action, this is like an assault on your personal worth. And I believe that it's this fear of failure that leads us to believe doing nothing is actually our best option, hoping that luck will get you where you need to go. I think that luck is lonely like a one-night stand, while skill provides the benefits of a long-term commitment. And I'm the marrying type. So I knew in that moment that I needed to turn chance into choice. Problem solved. And Mom says solving the problem is the hard part. Everything thereafter is just effort. But I've noticed this trend among people, how we kind of think that life is meant to just happen, as it just magically comes together. And I call this ROOTB syndrome, or right out of the box. Like an iPhone that comes charged with enough juice for immediate use and all of your personal needs met. We expect the perfect relationship right out of the box, the perfect job right out of the box. But if you're part of the population that's living, then you know that this isn't how life works. That momentum alone is not enough to get you where you're going. Life, like dance, needs effort. And when effort fails, when effort stops, your potential for growth halts. And if I allowed myself to think this way, then I definitely would be too short, fat, and bald to play this part. I needed to turn my dead end into a doorway. Now, there we go. In dance, we count a basic phrase, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and generally the first step happens on count 1. And with count 1, judgment begins. But in order to get to count 1 requires having been someplace moments prior, like count 0. And in this space between 0 and 1, before everything exists, anything is possible. And this was my secret watering hole. In the space between 0 and 1, every complaint finishes with so. I'm too short. So, stand taller, jump higher, learn visual foreshortening. Yeah, but I'm too fat. So, watch what you eat and contour your longest, leanest lines. Oh, but I'm too bald, they said it. So, try Rogaine. In this space between 0 and 1, creativity, effort, and responsibility thrive. There's no winning or losing, and certainly no blame or credit, denial or excuse. So every rehearsal, I dove into this space between 0 and 1, and I let my first attempt just start the conversation. It was neither good nor bad, it just was. And then I did it again. And now I had a point of comparison, better and worse, likely, less likely. And I did this again and again and again and again. I did this for every step, evaluating angles and speed, quality and emotion, until I had the most holistic understanding of what was possible. And what surprised me was in doing this, I was actually learning what was most and least likely to happen. I was developing an ability to predict. I was turning chance into choice. As prepared as I could be, moments before my debut, I got down to the stage and I thought about my brother and how he tells me to go big or go home. I was like, Chuck, I said to myself, you're still short and thick, but like strong. And I think the Rogaine is actually making it worse than it was. So you can go out there and be a short, fat, bald man who dances a part, or you can be the shortest, fattest, baldest heartthrob who has ever lit up a stage. And it was right there. My entire career, I stood out too much to fit in. And that whole time, I was the one who couldn't accept that short, fat, and bald could be the next best thing on the block. I knew in that moment that what I needed to change was not how they saw me. I needed to change how I saw myself. And with that levity, I realized that all that was left to do was go out on that stage and fail to the very best of my ability. And I did. I was the shortest dancer on that stage who jumped as high as the tallest. And I was the thickest dancer on that stage who moved lighter than the rest. And I dazzled that audience with the most effective bald head that Broadway had ever seen. It was the most spectacular failure of my life. And I didn't do it to prove a point to producers or critics. I just focused on turning chance into choice, on turning luck into skill. And I had the pleasure of repeating that performance for another year of my life, many times a week, finally with self-acceptance and humility and honesty. Short and chunky, they wrote. Wait, there. Short and chunky, he's a monster turner with impressive acrobatic breakdancing, one of the wonders of the ballet world, built like a bulldog, and yet able to create clear lines. His lack of inhibition belies his unorthodox ballet frame. There's that word again, unorthodox. But at this point, it didn't matter. I mean, this was like a sequel to that horror film franchise that comes back like 15 years after the original. It didn't matter. I learned too much from dance at this point, that living is physical, learning is actually painful, and limits don't exist, that kindness matters, practice will pay off, and an honest passion is always rewarded. And I learned to be vulnerable, that, why isn't it changing? There we go, to be vulnerable. That discipline will always overcome when determination wavers, and that your body will speak truths that no words will ever express. But more than anything, dance taught me that failure is a rainstorm. Thank you. The sooner you let yourself get wet, the quicker you realize how fun it is to skip through the puddles, dance in the street, and feel the cold rain on your face. You remember how harmless water is. And so I ask you to go to that place between 0 and 1, where potential and possibility thrive, and then dive in head first and see what you get from natural talent and a will to survive. In my entire career, I think my proudest achievement happened unexpectedly on a walk on 10th Avenue in New York. A stranger in his 70s stopped me on the street. He was a Vietnam vet. And after he stared at me for a moment, he just asked, "Are you the guy who did that dance about the war?" And I said, "Yes." He paused a moment, and then his eyes started to water. He grabbed my hand and he just said, "Thank you for setting me free." And I realized at that moment, I'd accidentally bumped into the only critic that mattered, and he didn't say anything about my body. So often we trap ourselves under silly expectations of whom we are meant to be and where we are allowed to go. We become too afraid to fail, and we end up in a dead end. Well, I think in that moment I've learned that all of my accomplishments were not because, no, in spite of my short, fat, bald body, they were because of it. Because it has allowed me to say what I think needs to be said, that failure only exists when you let it. Thank you.